I'm reprising something that I sang 2 weeks ago. It's one of Shir Yaakov's settings from Psalm 9. Um, the reason I wanted to bring it back is because where he sets this phrase, misgav le'itot batzara, a safe haven for times of distress. And that phrase, le'itot batzara, times of distress, is repeated in Psalm 10. So we'll see how that phrase is treated, I think, differently today. God as a fortress in times of trouble, or how he appears in times of trouble in Psalm 10. So this is the Psalm 9 setting from Shir Yaakov. Vihi havaya miskav ladach, miskav leitot batzara, ve'yivtechu echa yorei shemecha, ki lo azavta dorshecha havaya. Vihi havaya miskav ladach, miskav leitot batzara, ve'yivtechu echa yorei shemecha, ki lo azavta dorshecha havaya. Choneni, choneni, choneni havaya. Choneni, choneni, choneni havaya. Vihi havaya miskav ladach, miskav leitot batzara, ve'yivtechu lecha yorei shemecha, ki lo azavta dorshecha havaya. Choneni, choneni, choneni havaya. Choneni, choneni, choneni havaya. Choneni, choneni, choneni havaya. Choneni havaya.
That is just beautiful. What a fantastic choice. And it's nice to have it return as we're moving from Psalm 9 to Psalm 10, creating that connective tissue. Darina was asking in the chat, she's knowledgeable about the name for God, which is Havaya, but wanted to talk about for a second, what exactly is the meaning of Havaya? Cantor, in this context, do you see a certain interpretive quality to that name? Yael, I'm also thinking about the way that it's idiomatically used in modern Hebrew, so I'd love to hear from you too.
I think it's a very common play on words, or play on letters, I should say, in both renewal and reconstructionist Jewish spaces. Taking the ineffable four-letter name of God and rearranging them. We know that that four-letter name for God, Yud He Vav He, is connected to the verb to be. God says, Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh, I will be what I will be. You could almost think of the Yud He Vav He as like is, was, will be, all wrapped up into one. So by rearranging the letters to the word Havaya, which means existence, they're kind of saying God is the ultimate existence. So and again, it's very common. Shir Yaakov uses it, but I also see Rabbi Shefa Gold, who's in Reconstructionist circles, uses it as well. Kind of gets around that way.
Gorgeously said. And I'm thinking about the power of the weak-lettered name that we were talking about yesterday from, whose brilliant poetic offering was that? But this is a rearranging of that weak-lettered name into an eternal concept, existence. Yael, do you want to add any commentary to this?
Well, I'm thinking Havaya rather than existence. I think being. But another thing that comes up to me is that the word Havaya is female. Everything in Hebrew is very gendered. And so as you're singing, Jacob, I'm thinking of translating it all into the female form.
Mm.
So I, I don't know if I will ever do that, but it really gives me kind of an impetus to translate all of it, just change it to a female form. I think it will speak to me better than the way the Tanakh is written.
Magnificently done. I also, it is part of my job description at CBST as designated camp rabbi to mention that the Reconstructionist movement's camp is named Havaya, and that it is very much focused on a culture of being, and the sort of Brit Kehillah, the social contract for how campers and how staff are meant to treat one another is called How We Be. And it's this aspirational identity, we are all images of God. How we be is, our best possible selves. And think of what this means for, from the very start of your Jewish education in this immersive environment of a summer camp, for that to be the message that's just constantly in the air and in the water, that Havaya is the godliness that you're aspiring towards. Also, for anybody who is interested in feminine translations and feminine syntax in sacred text, I really suggest you look into Yael Kanarek, who some of us at CBST know. Yes, thank you, Lisa. We're on the same page. So Yael has written something, she is a visual artist, and she has created something called Torata. And you can visit her website. Lisa shared it with everybody. And it is a really, really thoughtful, really deep, really complicated feminized translation of Torah texts, a regendered Tanakh. Some of us at CBST went to go see her, her show at Hebrew Union College, where she has all of these beautiful graphic representations of feminine Torah. And I really can't recommend it highly enough. And then, of course, Judy is lifting up Rabbi Jill Hammer, who's also an incredible commentator, liturgist. All right, this was an awesome, awesome digression, which is still very much on topic. I wanted to lay out just something resembling a roadmap for the way that we're going to be studying Psalm 10, and also just a little reminder of the fact that this week is very special and this week is very different from all of our Psalm study. So just in general, as has become the Minhag HaMakom, the custom of this class, we'll begin by going through Psalm 10, and we'll be looking at its translations. We'll start with a reading of the Hebrew. We'll go through word by word, line by line, creating for ourselves sort of our own internal translation as a Psalms class community for what this means to us. We'll go over other interpretations of this psalm, all of our standard favorites. And then what I'd really love to do is, because this is a continuation of the acrostic of Psalm 9, after we have a really solid grounding in Psalm 10, I want to return and look at the two of them as one complete poem, perhaps as one complete psalm. We know that there's some controversy over whether we should see them this way. Robert Alter seems extremely skeptical on this subject if you've looked ahead at his translation. But perhaps this will deepen our understanding of both of these psalms, each of them having become so familiar to us. If you are so moved to create works of art inspired by this psalm, as you have been doing for every psalm so far, works of poetry, works of visual art, psalm slam, whatever comes to you, I would love to also dedicate over the course of these 2 weeks time for the sharing of those things. But I wanted to be honest and say that I know how meaningful it is to have Rabbi Kleinbaum be present for the sharing of the output of your creative process. And if it is something that, we don't have to decide this today, but if it's something that we want to save until she returns and have sort of a gallery exhibition of all of the works that have been created in her absence, I would love to be there for it. But we can see, we can sort of go through our experience of Psalm 10. Why I wanted to say that is I don't want anybody to pause your creative process. If you've been in the custom of writing your own poetic interpretation of each of the Psalms, please don't stop. But when we get to the end of our deep study on Psalm 10, we can discuss as a class if we'd like to move next into individual interpretations of it, or if it's something that we want to save for later. Does that make sense? Wonderful. So this week is special, significant, and different. This week includes the observance of Tisha B'Av. On Wednesday night, the fast begins in traditional Judaism because this is the commemoration of the destruction of the first and the second temple. The container on the Jewish calendar for all of the traumas of our people, it said that, you know, in every generation, the worst experience of the Jewish people happened on the 9th of Av, whether that was the Alhambra decree of 1492, moving forward in each generation. So on Wednesday night, our observances begin at CBST. Sherry and Debbie were asking exactly what time that was going to happen. That is 9 p.m. on Zoom, and we're going to be doing the candlelit service that we have in the past. We're encouraging everybody to bring candles, dim your lights, change your posture, whether that means you're sitting on the floor as we do in houses of mourning, or just doing something distinctly different to make this moment on the Jewish calendar not only feel different, but literally look different from any other way that we gather together in online Jewish space. On Thursday itself, it is customary for Jewish communities who are in courses of study to focus on the materials that are related to Tisha B'Av, whether that's the Book of Lamentations itself or some of the keynote, the heartbreaking melodies, psalms and songs that are sung during these services. So we will be studying Psalm 137. We will take a massive leap from the double digits to the triple digits and focus our study on that just for the space of Tisha B'Av. And then we will return to Psalm 10. So that's a little bit of what's ahead. If anybody has questions about CBST's Tisha B'Av observance, absolutely ask me. I'm going to be hanging out a little bit after class to talk about it specifically. And I have a request that if anybody plans to attend on Wednesday night or could be convinced to attend if you had a part in the service, we're offering several contemporary interpretations of the Book of Lamentations in English, and I'm looking for readers. So if you wouldn't mind putting into the chat, if you'll be there, it's also a nice peer pressure device of like, oh, look at all the nice people who are gonna go on Wednesday night. Please tell me. We will follow up with you individually and send you the assignment and when it comes in the service. So if you'd be willing to take on an English reading of part of the Book of Lamentations and an updated translation, put it in the chat and let me know. And I'll be really excited about it. Okay, Annika is also reminding everybody, in case you were focusing on the screen and not the chat, that if you have any creative contributions, you should send them to her as normal, and she'll be processing it for sharing. Thank you so much, Annika. And any other process kinds of questions before we dive into this psalm? I don't see anybody. Yael, do you see anybody?
No, I'm not seeing anybody. I just want to also mention that when I share my screen, it's really hard for me to see chat and raised hands. So, Rabbi Rapport, maybe you can keep looking at the chat as I'm sharing my screen so we don't miss anything
Gladly.
major.
And I know this to be a uniquely loving and compassionate group. Thank you for forgiving every one of us as we get better and better at the technology, get better and better at learning with each other, and I get better and better at teaching, hopefully. So with that, Yael, would you share your screen and we'll jump into the words of Psalm 10?
Will do. You see my screen?
We do.
Awesome.
Yael, would you, as you've done before, would you read the Hebrew and then I'll go through the English. I'll be rendering Yud He Vav He as Adonai, instead of Lord, which is a very accurate and careful translation?
Sure. למה אדוני תעמוד ברחוק, תעלים לעיתות בצרה?
Why, O Adonai, do you stand aloof, heedless in times of trouble?
בגאוות רשע ידלק אני, יתפסו במזימות זו חשבו.
The wicked, in their arrogance, hounds the lowly. May they be caught in the schemes they devise.
כי הלל רשע על תאוות נפשו, ובוצע ברך ניאץ אדוני.
The wicked crows about their unbridled lusts. The grasping person reviles and scorns Adonai.
רשע כגובה אפו, בל ידרוש, אין אלוהים כל מזימותיו.
The wicked, arrogant as they are in all of their scheming, thinks, God does not call to account. God does not care.
יכילו דרכיו בכל עת מרום, משפטיך מנגדו. כל צורריו יפיח בהם.
God's ways prosper at all times. Your judgments are far beyond the wicked one.
אמר בליבו, בל אמות, לדור ודור אשר לא ורע.
This wicked one thinks, I shall not be shaken. Through all time, never be in trouble.
עלה פיהו מלא ומרמות ותוך, תחת לשונו עמל ואוון.
Their mouth is full of oaths, deceit, and fraud. Mischief and evil are under their tongue.
ישב במערב חצרים במסתרים, יהרוג נקי. עיניו לחילך יצפונו.
They lurk in outlying places. In hiding, they slay the innocent. Their eyes spy out the hapless, the hopeless, the helpless.
יארוב במסתר, כאריה וסוכה יארוב לחטוף אני, יחטוף אני במושכו ורשתו.
They wait in hiding like a lion in their lair, wait to seize the lowly or perhaps the poor misbegotten. They seize the lowly as they pull their net shut.
ידכה יסוח ונפל בעצומיו חיל קאים.
They stoop, they crouch, and the hapless fall prey to their might.
אמר בליבו שכח אל, הסתיר פניו בל רעה לנצח.
They think God is not mindful. God hides God's face. God never looks.
קומה אדוני, אל נשא ידיך, אל תשכח ענבים.
Rise, O Adonai, strike at them, O God, do not forget the lowly.
על מה ניאץ רשע אלוהים, אמר בליבו, לא תדרוש.
Why should a wicked person scorn God, thinking, you don't call to account?
ראית כי אתה עמל וכעס תביט לתת, בידך עליך יעזוב חיליך. יתום אתה היית עוזר.
I got carried away. You do look, you take note of mischief and vexation. To requite is in your power. To you, the hapless can entrust themselves. You have ever been the orphan's help.
שבור זרוע רשע, ורע תדרוש רשעו בל תמצא.
Oh, break the power of the wicked and the evil, so that when you look for their wickedness, you will find it no more.
אדוני מלך עולם ועד, עבדו גויים מארצו.
Adonai is sovereign forever and ever. The nations will perish from God's land.
תאוות ענבים שמעת, אדוני תכין ליבם, תקשיב אוזניך.
You will listen to the cry of the lowly, O Adonai. You will make their hearts firm. You will incline your ear.
לשפוט יתום ודח, בל יוסיף עוד, לערוץ אנוש מן הארץ.
You will incline your ear to champion the orphan and the downtrodden, that humanity who are of the earth tyrannize no more. perhaps that mortals who are of the earth. Thank you. So I'd love to hear, in an initial reading, an initial hearing of this psalm, what impressions do people have? What's standing out to you? Elle, maybe we can move back to gallery view just for now as we're sharing general impressions, and then we'll go back to the text of the psalm that we can look at closely as we start to get into the careful pulling apart of the language to better understand it. But overall, what do you think? I see that Simon and or Sherry have thoughts, please.
As I was listening to this and looking at especially the translation, I was thinking how current it is, how much it applies to today's situation. And I was following the parallels, and they're so close. So that was my first impression.
Simon, I have to tell you that I also felt similarly. I'm wondering, I know that the text is not immediately in front of all of us, but anything stand out to you? Any particular piece that made you say, oh, today?
Oh, right from the beginning, from the very first line. Why do you stand aloof? The wicked in their arrogance, and it goes on and on like this. I mean, it just right from the first line.
The wicked crows about their unbridled lusts. The grasping man reviles and scorns the Lord. It just so.
I mean, they knew he was coming,
Yeah, and perhaps, as Andrea was saying, Trump meets his psalm. Unfortunately, not a particularly original character, right?
Right.
Both prescient and also like completely predictable. Fill in the name over time. Elle, who else?
Ben Shafran has his hand up. Ben?
What immediately stood out for me, and actually made me very angry, was Cantor Mimi's introduction that God is a fortress that you can rely on. The first verse over here, God is hiding himself, but in times of trouble. And the first thought that came into my head, what the hell was he doing the Holocaust?
Of course. You are an excellent theological company. I'm sorry, Benjamin, I think that I spoke over you. Please continue.
No, I just said it made me very angry.
Yeah.
Reading this and remembering the Holocaust.
Absolutely. And there is an entire body of theology, of responses that say, this, where could God have been? How can we believe in God? If anybody is interested in learning more about this, some of the people I would suggest reading, there's Rabbi Eugene Borowitz, who directly asked the question, how can we have a covenant with God? How can we have this brit if we feel so deeply not just betrayed, but led to slaughter? How do you repair a relationship from that point? And so his covenantal theology directly addresses this idea. There's also a beautiful book called The Female Face of God in Auschwitz by a feminist theologian whose name I can't remember. I think it's Melissa Raphael. She also speaks directly to this. And Benjamin, what I want to hold up is that the Holocaust is the example that many of us immediately think of where was God when the Jewish people needed God so desperately. But over time, you see this in the words of, and in the mouths of poets and lyricists and songwriters and commentators that, during the Spanish Inquisition, where was God? When the Hasmonean dynasty fell, where was God? This is a question that the Jewish people continue to ask over and over again. Thank you for asking it today.
Sure.
Cantor Nimi.
I'm moved by what Ben says. I really do. I agree with much of what Ben said about the difficult theology here in light of catastrophes for the Jewish people and for humanity. Specifically with this psalm, I'm really interested in a big emphasis on God being there for the anav and the ani, which
Mhm.
I was looking at the text last night, and I found they have the same root actually. That the lowly and the humble and the poor and the destitute and the afflicted, that it's all kind of a lot of wrapped up and connected meanings. And so I struggle theologically with something like this too, where like where is God when we see the continuation of persecution of the afflicted and of the poor and of the meek. But I'm really interested. Like this psalm puts a heavy emphasis on that figure of the lowly.
Yes, beautifully said. And sorry, there's so many things coming up for me at once. It's kind of hard for me to order and keep myself concise to make sure that we hear other people too, of course. There seems to be this insistence, right? The line where I accidentally trampled Yael, I was so eager to get to the interpretation. It struck me as a desperate cry of, and this is just my own reading of it. Of course, there are lots of different ways that we could interpret the tone of that particular line. But in the face of this description of how cruel the evil can be, how cunning, how well prepared, it seemed almost desperate, like, no, 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 you protect the poor, you are there for us. And it seemed to me that there was almost a quiet whisper of, aren't you? And Jacob, that to me is the feeling that I have theologically about this conversation. Two of my favorite ways to interpret this are through literature. So yesterday we were talking about Elie Wiesel's The Trial of God, which is a gorgeous play that he wrote, which is set sort of, it is informed by and in the shadow of the Holocaust. The other one that I love is by an Israeli author named Etgar Keret. He's a contemporary writer. He's the descendant of Polish Holocaust survivors. And he wrote he writes micro short stories. They're tops 3 pages long. And this one is called Pick a Color. It's one that in our adult B'nai Mitzvah class, when we were writing our spiritual autobiographies, I brought as a very different imaging of God. In this story, God is in a wheelchair. And that's a fascinating conception of what might it mean if we are awaiting God to help, but God has limited capabilities just like us if we are in God's image. I have said quite a lot. Yael, who else wants to?
Saul Zolkin is next.
So I also thought, as Cantonimi did and you, that unlike the other psalms, which are war psalms, or they're afflicting me, one person, whoever that is, this is that the powerful are afflicted. And I thought of New York. I grew up here, the slums of New York, where people got away with renting, often at exorbitant rates, horrible apartments, and it still goes on. And the latest is that in one of the small hotels on the Upper West Side, the city has started to house homeless men from shelters on the Lower East Side that are overcrowded, in trying to keep the COVID-19 rates low. Can't have all these people all together. And immediately you got the not in my backyard. Don't want these people here. It's like, it doesn't stop. This affliction of the poor and the downtrodden.
Mm-hmm. Yes, both prescient and predictable. A trend that we can depend on over time. Thank you.
Ellen Poster, sorry.
So I just, in the Elie Wiesel's Trial of God, at the end, after they find God guilty in the Holocaust. Then they go on to pray, the evening prayer. And I think that that's like Borowitz, who says, God was absent in the Holocaust, so now we can still have a covenant, but it's voluntary. It's something we choose to have. I think that's a very beautiful idea.
Ellen has read all of my favorite things. It's very convenient. And without spoiling the endings, because I think that both of these messages are so beautiful. And especially, this is the right week to be talking about this psalm and this idea as we face head on in the Jewish calendar, this recognition of destruction in every age. Again, the prescient and yet predictable downfall and devastating outcomes of attacks against our people, attacks of our people against one another. And it's at the end of Tisha B'Av, at the very last line of Lamentations, where we say, Hashivenu, Adonai v'nashuva. It moves us into this high holiday mode. Many of us have like the tune echoing in our heads as soon as the word is said. But the Hebrew word for that is nechemta. It is a consolation. It is an uplift. We cannot let the ending be so, it can be unfinished, but it can't be totally sad. We need some room for hope. And Ellen, I think that's what you're describing.
Marcia Melnick.
Oh gosh, my immediate response when I read this, I guess yesterday, was like, God, this is just matching my mood of complete and total despair. On some level, like how long, this is biblical times and they're talking about human beings who are evil. We are in the grip of the most evil right now, and our world is suffering. But this is not a new story. So my despair comes from how long what is human nature? Forget God. It seems like for me, what really stands out, God is kind of weak here. We always say, Kuma, rise up. But where is God? I'm not thinking about that. I'm more worried about what is human nature in this world. Who are we as human beings? Will we always be in this? And, look, I mean, the bottom line is I'm going to find the hope because we have this community. I have a million reasons to be grateful. I'm not there at the moment. I'm in a dark place in this world. So
I want to validate that. It is the human quality in me that makes me want to say like, no, it'll be okay. Please be okay. But that would be dishonest. That would also like indicate that while I have all the hopes in the world, I have some knowledge that other people don't, and I certainly don't. But I do think that, you're noticing, Marcia, that the story is consistent and it continues over human history with the way that humans act towards one another and towards the world. The other thing that's consistent about human behavior is that what an extraordinary exercise that we're participating in right now. We've got something like 60 people, and on some days 90 people, who in the morning all look to an ancient text in a foreign language. Even for those of us who are Hebrew speakers, the Hebrew of the Psalms is a foreign language much of the time. And it's describing how we feel. And that's a consistent, that while human beings have this capacity for unbelievable destruction, look at the creation that we make. And that there are these poems that hold our emotional spectrum that come from hundreds and hundreds of years ago. That is extraordinary. That's practically inexplicable. That is a thing to put faith in because you can't quite explain it. So on the one side of the spectrum, which is very true, and the calendar is recognizing that you can't be completely hopeful all the time. That would be exhausting. You need some days, you need maybe 3 weeks just to be in the depths and to mourn and feel miserable, because there's a lot out there to make one feel miserable. What are you supposed to do during that time? You're supposed to concentrate on beauty.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Sure.
Thank you.
Lisa Brown.
Hi, everybody. So I was thinking how Isaiah, how much this just reminds me of the Isaiah text that we're reading now, and that it sort of captures that moment in time right before the Israelites lose their ability to repent. That they're
The Chazon, the Haftarah from this past Shabbat.
I mean, all these Isaiah verses we've been reading, you know, and eventually God just says, forget it. You know, you can't hear me. You know, I'm not going to hear you anymore. You know, you cannot repent. Your mouths are not going to speak. Your ears are not going to hear my word. Or I think I'm paraphrasing in my own.
I like your translation.
Yeah, I mean, that's how I remember. But the Israelites lose the ability to repent to God, to get God's forgiveness. And the first temple is destroyed. And this reminds me of just that moment. There's this one person saying, wait a minute, God, all this stuff is happening, and where are you? And it happens anyway, and it happens. And there's just like this one voice, the silent voice, whatever is that silent, you know. So I remember things generally and never specifically.
The still small voice, maybe,
yeah.
that Elijah.
Yeah, my sin that I recount every Yom Kippur is that I remember all the vowels and never the consonants. I mean, that's my big sin in Hebrew. But yeah, I mean, I just remember things generally all the time and never specifically. But this is just, you know, just that moment. And interestingly, I'm in this snit with a student of mine who wants to write about the beneficial aspects of for-profit management of shelters. You know, getting to back what Saul is saying. And it's just a funny conversation because he sees this all in positive ways, that this is a positive thing, that they're well run, and they're, you know, and I don't know, it just brings up all of that stuff, is that where does profit live in our world? And of course, I'm a big tenant advocate, and where does profit live in the world of real estate is my specific, always what I come back to. And healthcare.
Thank you, Lisa. Noticing our time, I want to go through everybody's initial responses to this psalm. And I think that tomorrow we'll start to really focus on the language of it and the different interpretive possibilities of the language. So I'm going to ask Yael to just one after the next call on those who want to share. At the very end of class, I'll stay a couple extra minutes because I have had a request from members of this class to explain the Hebrew Bible app that I love, that's really helpful for me in translation, and we could use it as a tool for tomorrow's class. So, Yael, you are totally in charge.
Jeremy Lawrence.
I just want to say that one impression is that God is an expert at hiding God's self.
What a beautiful sentence.
Just, it seems to be the motivation for this psalm. You can't find God. That's all.
Thank you.
Larry Finkelstein.
So Marcia took my thoughts and said them much better than I ever could have. But I do have a question. In the Hebrew, there are words that are in parentheses. And I don't think we've seen that before. And I don't know what that is and why it is. And there were in parentheses in the English translation.
Sure. So this is also common when you look at some translations of Torah text. I think parentheses is the way that Sefaria in general approaches this problem. So Torah text and sacred text, Tanakh text, is handed down over time, and it's very faithfully copied. And you can chalk a couple things up to human error, absolutely. But there are some times when we get words in the Hebrew that don't make sense, that either we've completely lost their meaning over the tides of like linguistic evolution, or that maybe they're just spelled wrong. Maybe they're typos. If you look in Robert Alter's translation, you see his frustration with a lot of those parentheses in this psalm. He's like, this is just, I love Alter because he's so transparent. He's like, there is no way that this could mean that thing, but this is my best guess. And this seems to be a very poor simile, but like, what can I do? It's received over generations. So Larry, when you see in the Hebrew letters a parentheses, usually those letters don't have vowels with them. Yeah, can we pull up the text really quick? We'll jump to one of those verses just so everybody can see it. Great. Scrolling. For the first time, we see one of those parentheses that Larry was talking about. Ah, got it. Verse 5. Yes. Okay. So see, I inverted what Safari usually does. See how the first time that perhaps my Kita Aleph class will recognize Dalid, Resh, Kaf, Vav. That it's not super clear what that word is supposed to be. It looks like it's probably from the root derech. So Safaria's best guess, and they're not guessing on their own. This is the way that, Maimonides, and this is the way that when we read these things out loud that we have typically put in their vowels, the parentheses, the brackets, are what we think the word should be. But honestly, it is not exactly the way that Dalef Resh Kaf Vav is rendered. It could be Darko, it could be Darhu, but in context, it makes the most sense to say Derechav. Does that make sense? Great. So yeah, Elle can bring the screen down. She already did. Thank you so much. And anytime you see those brackets, it's best guess in context. Read it like this, which means translate it like this. Thanks for asking.
Ira is next.
Yeah, hi. So the discussion about God's abandonment of humanity and where is God just brought to mind for me a wonderful contemporary artistic exploration of these themes is in Leonard Bernstein's Third Symphony, which is subtitled Kaddish. And he explores these themes in a very powerful way and centering actually on the covenant. I mean, that's a big piece of the central thesis of the symphony, which is mostly narration. I mean, it's obviously a lot of music, but there's a big part for a speaker who talks about God's abandoning the covenant. And it came to my mind when we were discussing this, and I would actually recommend people listen to it because it's a very, very powerful work and explores a lot of these ancient themes.
What a wonderful recommendation. Perhaps you could put a link to it in the Facebook group?
Sure.
For Homer Lidrosh, additional material for discovery.
Absolutely.
So Rabbi, it's 10:43. There are 3 hands up. Do you want to hear people, or should we get back to these people tomorrow and let Cantor Nimi sing us out?
I think that we will go with the latter. And Dean, Shep, and Michael will be the first on our list before we jump into the every word of the psalm tomorrow. Thank you, everybody, for being so honest, so vulnerable, and so unbelievably poetic in just your first reading of this psalm together, and the deep understandings that you shared.
Now there we go. Now I'm kind of thinking about all of Psalm 10 as a response to this verse from Psalm 9. So that's really reframing. I want to thank you to Ben Chaffin for giving permission for anger in response to this verse. Vihi havaya miskav ladach, miskav leitot batzara, ve'yiftechu vecha yorei shemecha, ki lo azavta dorshecha havaya. Vihi havaya miskav ladach, miskav leitot batzara, ויבטחו בך יורש שמך, כי לא עזבת דורשך הוויה. חונני, חונני, חונני הוויה. חונני, חונני, חונני הוויה. ויהי הוויה משגב לדך, משגב לעיתות בצרה. ויבטחו בך יורש שמך, כי לא עזבת דורשך הוויה.
Thank you so much. I look forward to hearing from Shep and Dean and Michael tomorrow morning and for our continued discussion. If anybody wants to hang out a little longer, certainly the room will be open until 10, but I'm going to give a very brief orientation to the Hebrew Bible app. That's one of my favorite Tanakh study tools. So I had mentioned this app in the one time that I was substitute teaching this class several weeks ago. It is called, it is an Apple app. There is not an Android equivalent yet, unfortunately. And the reason why I like this app is that it doesn't do anything so revolutionary, but it puts a lot of books together that are commonly available, and it just puts them all into one place, which is what some of the best apps do. So just refreshing people's memory, if you're looking for it, it's called Hebrew Bible. It's spelled like this with this case sensitivity, capital H, capital B. The creator's name is Zev Clementson. It costs money. It is the best money I ever spent. I credit it with getting me through rabbinical school. And its icon on your screen is a chai, so you know what to look for. If you have already downloaded this app, I know that Jeremy has. If you're navigating from your home screen, I wish I could share my iPhone screen on Zoom, but this app only works on iPads and iPhones, and I can't do it on my laptop, so I have to like narrate what's happening.
Well, Marcia Melnick was just showing us her phone. You want to do that again, Marcia?
Yes. Okay. So I can kind of do that too. So this is the chai is backwards. You can see it says Hebrew Bible. I'm clicking on it. And it's taking me directly to Psalm 10. That's the last thing that I studied. I can hit the back button in the upper corner. And I can choose from any biblical book in all of Tanakh, whether that's Torah, whether that's prophets, or whether that's in the writings like the Psalms. So I am jumping back to the Psalms. I can choose any chapter of what I decide to read. So I can scroll straight to Psalm 10, which is what I'm going to do. Read it. That's how I got to this page right here. This play button in the upper right corner, even though it's mirrored on the screen right now, has somebody read it aloud for you. They do not chant it. They don't chant it in cantillation, so it's not a very helpful cantillation tool. But if you want to hear somebody read it, and then here is my favorite part. I can click on any word in the psalm, and I'll just ruin the ending for tomorrow, that one of the first things I wondered about was pride, this first word in the second line. So I'm clicking on the Hebrew word, and I have a screen that's coming up. It's backwards, so that's not very helpful. This purple page, which happens when you click on any of the Hebrew words of any of the texts, gives you all of the definitions and all of the different verbal forms of that root, which is in white letters up here. So it's telling me that the root is ga'ava, gimel aleph vav hey. And you can define it as pride, majesty, a rising up that's a swelling like the sea swells. It can also be haughtiness. And it gives the part down here, it gives the part of speech, it gives the gender of the noun in particular. And this is the part I really, really like. These two buttons up here, these two gray buttons, one of them says list verses for this word. If I click it, it tells me that this word occurs 19 times in the Hebrew Bible, and it gives me every single citation. It doesn't translate them, but it tells me where I can go to find it. If I hit the other button, which says B, so basically if I list the verses for this word, there's a book for that. It's called a concordance. And it's just a very thick book with every single listing of every single word in the entire Bible. And I would flip to the Gimel page and say, I want to find Ge'ava, and then it would give me all 19 examples, but I have it in the phone. The other button says, take me to the Brown Driver Briggs page for this word, BDB, and they have scanned my absolute favorite biblical tool, which is the Brown Driver Briggs concordance. Cantor Nimi is holding it up. It is a classic. It is on many people's bookshelves. As Cantor Nimi can Vanna White just demonstrate for all of us, it is a very thick book. It is not always the easiest to decipher all of their different acronyms for, like, this word derives from the Ugaritic or the Hittite. These are the different verbal forms of the word. So that's why I love the fact that it is entirely inside the app. It just jumps you to that particular page. The other very cool feature about it that I don't use terribly often is at the bottom of the app screen, you see a number of different small icons, and you see that same icon that you have on Google Maps. And it will take you to the Google map of the places described in the different texts that you are reading. So do you want to see Babylon? Here is Babylon. There is the map on Google Earth. Not always so terribly relevant in the Psalms themselves, but very, very cool. So once again, I see that Judith thinks that maybe the wrong app was purchased. It is called Hebrew Bible. I typed the way it is spelled into the chat. I'll show you the icon again. The creator is Zev Clementson. It is $9.99. You do have to pay for it. I think it is worth it. And Leslie is accusing me of being a salesperson for this app. I receive no kickbacks from Zev Clementson. But I do have to say that since all of you are involved in a daily study of the Hebrew of Tanakh text, I think that you will make your money back very, very quickly with your use of this app. All right, any other questions about its use? Jeremy, did I do an okay job with the tutorial? I can ask you to unmute, yeah.
Hi. So if you want to look up a word.
So unfortunately, well, okay. So is the question, Jeremy wants to look up the word Ga'ava and find how many times it occurs in the Hebrew Bible?
Or get a translation.
Without
citing a text.
You have to go to the text first.
Okay.
Unfortunately, it is not the greatest dictionary app in terms of, I just want to find the word. I don't want to find the context of the word.
Okay, I get it. Thanks.
Yeah. If you bought one of the books, if you bought a concordance, or if you bought the Brown Driver Briggs, you could
I have Brown Driver Briggs.
Excellent. So that is exactly the way you use it. You would go to the Gimel, you would go to Ge'ava. This app means that you would have to be in Psalm 10 and say, oh, ge'ava, let's look at it from here.
Great,
There's
thanks.
probably a way to do it the other way that you're describing. I just don't know how.
No, but I'm obviously always going to be usually going from text.
That is what I usually find myself doing. But it's a fair question. Other questions about the app? Great. Babette, if everybody is not already unmuted, or at least has the consent to unmute themselves, please do so.
Everybody should be able to unmute themselves.
Excellent. Thanks, Babette.
No worries.
So thanks for indulging me on this, what is this, like a QVC showcase of the Hebrew Bible app. I feel obligated to tell the story that I was in a Hebrew Bible class. I don't know if Cantor Nimi is still here or any other alumni of Hebrew Union College, but I was in a Hebrew Bible class with Rabbi David Sperling, who's a biblical Hebrew scholar, and we were going through some text. I actually don't remember what it is right now. And he said that a certain word was a hapax legomenon that only occurs once in any body of literature. And of course, like me being the smart ass that I was, I had my phone and I had my app and I clicked on the word and I said, I thought I said quietly, I clearly did not. It's not. There's 3 indications. And this person, he did not have the app. He did not have a concordance in front of him. He spun around and turned to me. It was like the Exorcist level spin and said, Rook's rapport. I know you're looking at some infernal device that is telling you that there's a citation in Habakkuk, but if you looked closely, you would know that, and he had it right off the top of his head. So this app is no substitution for great teachers or actually doing the work. But it's
So
really.
I want to tell you the symphony that I mentioned, the speaker at the end basically says, you know, God, you need us more than we need you.
Ooh.
Because without us, you would not exist.
And the Psalms talk about that too, where we'll get there. I don't know if we'll get there in these 2 weeks. But there is you need us to utter your name. This is the reciprocal relationship that we have going. We don't exist without the other.
Oh, I have my doubts.
That's fair. Everyone is absolutely entitled to their own theology and the opportunity to write a book about it.
Human hubris is the major problem.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Rabbi.
We keep creating God in our own